Hello, welcome back to the studio. Well, as you no doubt saw in the thumbnail, this week I'm concentrating on a monochrome painting. In particular, I want to look at contrast. It's the lights and darks in a painting, and it doesn't matter whether you're using an oil painting, an acrylic, a watercolour, or even pencil. Contrast is important because it gives us a sense of depth and distance in our work. I chose to do it in black and white so that you could see it very obviously rather than using colour, which is just a little bit more of a confusion sometimes. So sit back and watch me compose this little painting from a blank piece of paper through a simple sketch to a finished painting. Happy painting, people! Before I start any new painting project, I like to do a little plan, and it can be as simple as this. Just a little scrap of paper. I taped it onto a board so you can see what I'm doing. I got a pencil, and all I really want to do is just to divide my canvas into roughly thirds. So imagine this is your canvas, so it's about a third each that way, about a third that way and that way. And this gives us these little areas, they're little hot spots, points of interest. I'll make that a little bit brighter so you can see it. So where these third lines intersect, that's our hot spot, a place of interest, a place where our eye might be drawn to. And this helps me lay out the design of my painting so that it's more interesting. That way you don't end up with something sort of creeping off the edge of the canvas, or something just simply in the wrong place, like being right in the centre, a bit of a roundabout, and your eyes just sort of end up staying here. They never actually travel around the painting. So having decided on thirds, we can use these as a rough guide. Now, don't get too hung up on this. Don't force yourself to stick on these thirds, because you can move up and down on the third line or in and out a little. They're just a nice sort of place to work from. Now, I know that I'm going to need the horizon line in, so I'm going to have to think about maybe either a horizon line that's above centre or below centre. Dead centre is, again, one of those harsh sort of lines in a painting where it sort of looks like a painting of two halves. You want either maybe 2/3 being the background and a third for the foreground, or the other way around, or some small combination of the two. But again, this all comes with the planning stage of things. So let's say I want to go just a little bit above the third. I'm going to drop in the horizon line just about there. I'm thinking about having a big feature here possibly. Let's drop in a mountain. Again, you can see that drawing skills aren't exactly necessary just here. So there's a nice foreground mountain, and we'll maybe have something happening in the background there, maybe something happening over there. And on this hot spot, I might be having some sunshine. Now, again, you can adjust things a little bit as you go, but essentially all I'm doing here is I'm just thinking about how I can lay my painting out so that it's visually pleasing. Now, there's a little bit of weight here on this side of my picture with a mountain. This line maybe isn't going to be so straight. It might actually be more curved, like so. And you see the effect of doing that. It means it draws your eye into the centre. But this is the side of the canvas with a lot of weight on it. So maybe I want to balance my scene up with something a little more with weight on this side. So maybe we're going to put in some fir trees over on this left hand side, and maybe a nice bank. And very quickly you see that I've managed to compose a little painting with a point of interest on a third here, another point of interest on a third here. Ignore that, ignore that little circle, doesn't exist. A little bit of light here, and some weight here by way of some trees. This little sketch will save me maybe doing a whole painting and then standing back and looking at it and going, it's terrible, it doesn't look great. And you can resketch this several times, and I might do several more versions of this and then decide which one I like. But thinking about it, this is probably going to be the one I like most of all, because it's a proportion which I've used before that I know works. So a little bit of background knowledge, a little bit of experience of having done a few paintings that work quite well, paid a dividend. I think this is how I'm going to lay out my painting, and now I know about this, I can turn this into the first part of the painting. So let's put this aside, keep this as my reference, and put a canvas up. So here's my canvas, 16 inches by 20, and it's painted with grey gesso, but you could use acrylic, as long as the surface is completely sealed and it doesn't absorb the oil paint, because this is a wet on wet oil painting technique, like the one made famous by Bob Ross. He would paint on a canvas that was pre-wetted with something like this, Bob Ross liquid white. This gives us a nice slick surface upon which we can add colour and we can blend, rather than spending a lot of time trying to mix colours up and blend them on our palette. I want a thin, even coat of this Bob Ross liquid white oil paint on my canvas. Not too thick and not too thin. I keep a small amount of the liquid white in this airtight container in the freezer. Chilling it means it doesn't dry out, and once it warms up again, I can apply a thin coat to my canvas. I'm going to use an old Bob Ross landscape brush to do that. Take a small amount on your brush, and I like to divide my canvas up into sections and then really scrub it in well. The question I get asked quite a lot is, if you're going to be putting liquid white onto a canvas, why did you bother painting it grey? Why didn't you just leave the canvas white and just put liquid white over the top? Well, the answer, I hope, is quite clear. Even with liquid white on my canvas and a few stray hairs, I can still have a slightly off-colour canvas. Pure white really isn't very helpful. I want a canvas which is toned down. This colour is called neutral grey, and the reason why we use a neutral grey colour is because I can go lighter than this with a highlight for some snow, or I can go darker with this, maybe for some shadows. So this gives me the sort of the middle area in terms of the strengths of colour. Whereas if I paint onto a canvas which is already brilliant white, well, making anything show up on brilliant white is going to be a real task. So by toning the canvas down, it means we don't stand there painting on a brilliant white canvas glaring us in the face. And as you see, I just worked in a little bit of that liquid white on my canvas. I'll finish off that section with some little flat strokes. And of course you want to be able to test it so that you know how much is on there, because too much is too much. And if I use my fingertips and just touch that little patch, you can see I got some little fingerprints back. That tells me I've got about the right amount on there. If I touch my canvas and it looked like that, it would be far too wet. It's more like ice cream. So we want to see our fingerprints nice and clear and nothing like that. Okay, I'll give the rest of my canvas a covering of the liquid white. There, and to finish off my painting, some nice long flat strokes, firm pressure just to even out the surface, across and up and down. And don't forget, do that little fingertip test again. Most important, you get this part of your painting done correctly. You can see, I probably could do with a touch more in a couple of places. There. One last thing, I want to use this brush again, but it's covered in liquid white. So don't forget, give it a nice dry clean on a piece of paper towel before you try and add more colour with it, or else all that liquid white's going to get onto your painting. Now, let's have a look at the palette. For this painting, I'm using a very limited number of colours. As I mentioned, it's based on one of the Bob Ross classics, Shades of Grey. He also did another one called Blue Winter. Again, very limited palette. Now, you might be wondering why I don't just put out some black and white and make grey that way. Well, I want you to get used to making your own colour grey. In a previous video, I showed you how to mix blue and alizarin crimson to make a nice lavender colour, then add a small amount of cadmium yellow to make a lovely grey colour. This gives you a big advantage because you can make your grey colour slightly blue tinted or slightly red tinted. So that way you can get some flexibility in the way you mix your colours. there's also a little section down here which I've set aside. These are for alternative colours in case you don't have these ones. You can mix dark sienna and ultramarine blue. It makes a fantastic grey colour. Or you can mix Van Dyke brown and Prussian blue, and that will make you a lovely colour as well, all in the shades of grey. I recently made a video where I looked at making my own black colour. And here you can see a purple colour made with alizarin crimson, phthalo blue and yellow gave me these colours. I can have my grey colours here made with some titanium white. I can have the slightly warmer, slightly browner. So you have a lot of flexibility. And there's that ultramarine blue dark sienna combo. See, quite dark brown colour, but when mixed with titanium white, makes a lovely warm soft grey colour. Let's see how we get on with our own painting with a limited palette. My favourite way of mixing up greys and black colours is to start off with that lavender tone. I take about 1 part of the phthalo blue and about 4 or 5 times the amount of alizarin crimson. Looking for a nice mid lavender colour, nice sort of purpley colour. As you see, you want to flip this over several times until you've got it really well mixed. There, that's the sort of colour I'm looking for. So not too blue, not too red, but somewhere in between. Now, let's add a small amount of the cadmium yellow, but go easy with this. You want just a small amount, and we'll just rub those into each other and see what we get. It takes a few moments, but as you see, a sort of greenish grey colour appears. Now, vary the amounts of these colours. If you carry on adding more yellow, you'll push it towards the green side, but simply add in a little bit more of the lavender colour and you can go back towards the grey side. There you are, a lovely dark grey colour. Once you're happy with that, then we can start adding some of this to the canvas. One other thing, I should point out that I've actually put in some little reference marks here. These are just simply map pins. Buy them from a stationer's, and I simply use these and press them into the side of my canvas and they mark my horizon line. As you know, looking at a little diagram, it's just a little bit below the halfway mark. So this is where my riverbank is going to be, and above this is going to be my mountain. I'm going to have some nice clouds either side and maybe some bright sunlight here in the centre. I've mixed up a little more of that paint, got a nice grey colour going. And you can decide if you want to go more lavender with it. Just put a little bit more of that into the centre of the painting. As you see, I'm using that old 1-inch brush with the liquid white on it. And I always want to start my paintings up in the corners. If anything gets too dark, I prefer it to be up here rather than right in the centre where it might really affect my painting. And as you can see, I get a lovely warm, almost lavender tone from my painting. Now I'm going to have some clouds running through here, and for them to show up I do need some colour. So it's no good being too pale with this. As you see there where I started out, see that really dark corner? Take a few seconds just to work that out a little bit more. As I work down towards the horizon line, I want my colours to run out. I want the sky to become paler. And as you see, you can get a super lovely soft lavender grey colour. See, I really love that little bluish streak coming through. I'm taking a little bit more blue on my brush. Scrub that in. Don't forget, you've got a big mountain sitting here, you've got some trees over in there, and some little background mountains here. So not everything in your painting is going to be seen in the finished work. So you've got to try and keep that in mind. Now, time to stand back and make sure you're happy with the background sky. Well, a quick stand back from the painting revealed, of course, this is fairly even. In other words, there isn't really much of the darkness in those corners. So I've decided to come back in and add a little bit more colour there. And the idea here is I want to really draw the eye to the mountain. By darkening up the corners, we create that drama in our painting. Your eye gets drawn to the centre of the picture a little more, rather than just looking at sort of a sea of grey fog. So there we go. Once again, these little tricks and tips that you see me using to create a painting, you use for your own scenes, and you'll find that you create some really lovely dramatic paintings just by making sure that you've got some of these little areas of your painting lighter or darker. There, you see that really kind of draws your eye now to the centre of the picture. Your eyes don't want to go off the corners so much. I think I want to scratch on the design of my mountains next so that I don't put the sunshine in the wrong spot. I brought my little sketch in so you can remind yourself exactly how I want to lay out my painting. 1/3 and 1/3 across. Somewhere in here is the mountain, then 1/3 and 1/3 across. Some brightness there in the sky. And that will just sit nicely in that little gap. So there we go. A little bit of planning might save us a lot of heartache later on. I'm carrying on using this old brush, and again going into some of this lavender colour with a touch of yellow to make it into an almost blackish tone. Even add a touch more alizarin crimson this time. I really want this lovely bright area of my sky. And just in above it, I'm going to put in some nice cloud effects. Not a lot of detail here, and I know where the mountain's going to be, and if I lose that, it's okay. It doesn't look too stripy for my taste, so I'll just darken out a few corners here. We do some slight diagonals. It's a great way of getting rid of stripy skies. If you just do a few soft diagonal colours so that you go from one to the next to the next, you see it kind of creates sort of almost like a step. And that's a great way of disguising the fact you've got what I call a deck chair sky. It's just a little bit too stripy. I also like that little slightly soft downward angle there. To blend my sky, I'll switch to a nice soft fresh new brush. Make sure there's no thinners on it, it's completely dry, and I want to just brush these across gently. I don't want to lose too much of the detail here, and so if I go at angles it's going to really blend it a lot, so I'm just going to stroke them along. As you see, it does just enough to move some of the paint but doesn't lose all of that amazing detail. After a little bit of a stand back and a peer at my painting from the other side of the room, I decided the blue was just a little bit too dominant, just a little bit too confusing for my eye. So I added a little bit more dark to the top, decreased the amount of blueness there with a little bit more of the blackish purple colour I made, and I added a little bit more cloud effect in here and then softened it down. But I left a few of these lovely stripes coming through here. I think they work quite well. Of course, I've lost the shape of my mountain completely, but that's easy. I can scratch that back in again. As for my sunlight, well, I'll leave that to the end of my painting. So you see from that last little sequence, I managed to re-establish the position of my mountain and make sure that I've got these little arrows in place. This dictates the direction that the light and the snow would flow. To the right in highlights and over to the left in shadow. An important part of understanding depth and distance in your painting is to know how much of a contrast you want between shadow and light. For instance, these little mountains in the background, left and the right side, are going to be, well, almost exactly the same colour. A little bit darker on one side and a little tiny bit brighter on the other, but not much of a contrast, as opposed to this big mountain, which they're going to be big contrasts. Learning how much dark and light to use in your painting will dictate how much depth and distance you can gain. And of course, we mustn't forget also that we have a light source back here, which is sitting right up here, between these two mountains. It will affect how much light we have on the left and right sides of these peaks. So we have to keep that one in mind as we do our painting.
Let's have a look at what I'm going to be painting my mountain with. Traditionally, I would have used a palette knife. It's the way Bob did all his mountains usually. But I also like to use brushes occasionally. You see, sometimes you want to use something a little bit more delicate than a palette knife. And this is where I like to use a small round brush or a filbert. I think these will give me a more delicate and more sort of subtle look to my mountains, a bit less harsh. Now to a question that was asked by you, one of my lovely subscribers, relating to the consistency of paint. You see, some of the paint can be really oily, like this titanium white. You can see the oil running down my palette. And I want this to be firm and dry. So what can I do with it? Well, here's my top tip. Put it onto a piece of corrugated paper. You see, leaving it to sit there for just maybe 10, 15 or even 20 minutes, the oil will sink into the cardboard and it'll firm the paint up completely. More like sort of whipped cream consistency or even cream cheese. But don't leave it on there too long. Once it's been sitting there for 10, 15 minutes and you've turned it over a couple of times, assess how stiff it's getting. If it gets too dry and too stiff, you won't be able to use it for anything. It'll turn into concrete.
So here's my paint about 20 minutes later. As you can see, it's firmed up a fair bit. It's really quite stiff and sticky now. All the oil has dropped into the cardboard. I'm going to transfer this now to my palette because if I leave it sitting here for much longer, it's going to become unusable. There we go. Smear it onto there. You can see that's really lovely and firm and dry. Now, for those background mountains, as I mentioned, the light and dark side is going to be much closer together. The contrast, the difference in colours are going to be closer together. So I'm going to mix up a nice grey colour, take a little bit of our lavender tone, a little bit of our firm white, and I'm going to mix up a value here which is fairly pale. Notice that I've put down the two colours in different places. I'm not sort of pull them into each other. So rather than making just one value, I'll make several values, sort of spread across from one side of my palette to the other here. And I'll do a little test, see what it looks like on my painting. And remember, if there's much of a change, it'll probably be lighter here in the centre where the sun is and slightly darker to the side. So let's just have a go at putting on some colour on the outside edges first. You see, I just want the colour to be a little different to the background sky, but not to be very different. Against that very dark piece of sky there, I can go a touch lighter. And against that pale sky, I can stay dark. For the rough outlines, the rough shapes, it's the sort of shadow side of my mountain, so again just going to drag my brush down, let it just sort of skip on the canvas a little bit. At the base of them I'm probably going to drop in just a little bit of mist, but I would rather be on the safe side with this rather than be pure white colour. So you're getting a little brighter there. I'll come back and fiddle with those if I need to. Time to move on to the big mountain. For the bigger mountain, I want a stronger contrast. In other words, a more noticeable shadow side and a more noticeable highlight side. So I'm going to make this a little bit stronger, and we're going to just underpaint this shadow side now. Traditionally, Bob would use a palette knife to underpaint his mountain, and it would all be dark, and then he would put the highlights and shadows on top, and that is absolutely fine if that's how you want to paint mountains. But I'm just sort of showing you a variation, an alternative. Now, I do want to put in some good strong darks here, so I'm going to get into a little bit more paint. I might come back in and drop in a little more detail there. Remember, we don't want to come down too low with this. Our horizon lines in here, I might be putting on some little detail back in here. So the temptation is to sort of drag your colours right down to the baseline here, and I'm going to say hold back on doing that. I quite like that line, but I think it's a little bit too wiggly and jiggly, so I'm going to just pull that in there. And very quickly you see I can start to create this mountain, and I'll tend to flip it over and do highlights with the other side. And again, not pure white, grubby off-whites are what I'm looking for here. Again, light touch, get rid of that scratch mark. Super light. And this is where having that super firm dry paint is really sticky. That's where it really helps, because you can let the paint stick the brush to the canvas. You don't have to lean on the brush at all. You can create these lovely textures. As I said, if you like using palette knives, then that's the thing you should use. It's up to you. I'm going to pick up my little soft 1-inch brush. So you might not even see all of that. I might even cover it up completely. So here's my little painting so far. I think it's really interesting. The use of contrast to get depth and distance in our work. It's a really important factor, and we don't always sort of consider that. There was that little section there where the same colour, literally an inch or two apart, appeared totally different. One almost the same colour as the sky, and the other one really standing out. It was much darker. Painting these little monochromes really helps you understand how the use of contrast, making them stronger or weaker contrast, can really give you a sense of depth and distance in a painting. For instance, this appears to be really much closer because the contrast, the difference between the light and the dark, is that much more apparent. And as I work forwards in my painting, the contrast will get greater and greater and greater, until here in the foreground I'll be using some very dark colours and some very bright highlights. Speaking of which, I need to turn the light on my painting. It's looking a bit drab. So don't forget, watch this little video all the way to the end, because it won't be to the last minute that I actually find the light switch. We'll see what I can do with it then. It might be quite interesting, but you will have already seen it on the thumbnail. Anyway, sit tight. More painting to come. Before I make any other decisions, I really want to put in another feature, which is going to be the water. Knowing where that's going to sit in the paint will determine how many sort of trees and features I can put in. And I know I want sort of something sort of back here, and sort of coming along, and then maybe sort of coming round here, and going off the corner here. That was the sort of general idea that we had with our little sketch. As I say, it doesn't matter if you change your mind. As long as you're working to a sort of a rough plan, that's the main thing. Now, the other thing to think about here is in terms of, again, sort of like, do you want things to look more distant? If I have a little strip of water coming around here like this, so in other words, it's only very small here, and it doesn't grow very much by the time it gets to here. It's only sort of down to here. And this will look much more as though I'm almost looking sort of down onto the scene. In other words, I'm standing a long way back from it. But if I have this coming through here and broadening out tremendously here, and keep those angles fairly flat, but going off the corner here, you see, immediately this gives the sense that there is an expanse of water here, that I'm actually much closer to the water. I'm not standing back from it. So this is more the sort of look I'm possibly going to be going for, that I want to actually look like I'm going to be closer in it. So I can actually put in some trees in here, which are going to be a decent sort of size. Okay. If I'm sort of standing further back, then these trees would look at completely wrong scale. And it might even be that I will paint these trees so they actually clip the corner of my canvas. And I'm going to want something back in here. Again, just sketching, just kind of sketching here, dropping in something, sense of depth and distance. And then possibly coming round to the bank here, again, maybe I'll want something a little taller. Now, all of these little sketch marks I'm putting on here onto my canvas, they can all be rubbed out. So I'm not committed yet. For some people might say I should have been committed long ago, but so you can see already that I'm sort of thinking about how I can get a plane here, another plane here, and another level here. Possibly I might move this down a little bit. So again, I'm just changing my sketch as I go, shifting things around to fit the way I want it to look for my own painting. By doing this and not being afraid to make little changes, this is how you can sort of create a better scene without getting too far worried about things and thinking, well, I might have to undo all of that, because if I do something I really don't like, I can just pick up my old brush and simply blend it out. I'm going to put in this little row of fir trees back here using a fan brush. I've got some of my nice dark mixture here. I'm going to use a little bit of white with it. As I mentioned, as I add more and more layers to my painting, I'm going to increase the contrast. Now, so this little row of trees here might just want to be just a little bit stronger than the background, but we won't know until we've actually done a few little taps and a few little tests. Let's just tap a few of these in. Notice I'm using my brush, the handle upright, just tapping and stroking down with the downward action. It's like a little pecking action. Now remember that the bottom edge of these trees is probably going to be turned into a snow bank here. So I'm not really too worried if it's a bit raggedy down here. What I'm more interested in is the colours. Now, does this look nice and distant? I think it does. Is it as strong as these colours here? Maybe not, but I'm okay. This is more in shadow. So this expects to be a little bit on the dark side. I just want a colour which is darker than this area. And that clearly is. I'll swing my camera around a bit so you get a better view of what I'm doing. So a little bit more dark, a little bit less white. And as I go over to here, I'm probably just going to go for a few little upward flicks. There we go. So we've got a nice sense of depth and distance. I just drop in some snow under there, and that'll really push that way back in my painting. Let's say we've got liquid white on here. I can just tap that base out, create a nice misty effect. If you want more mist, that's easy. Just tap into a little bit of this dirty white paint. Tint it up a little bit if you wish to. My paint's drying out. Let's put a little bit of touch of blue into it just to give it a coolness. Yeah, there we go. That's it, just a touch of blue. It'll quickly mix with this grey colour here, so it won't stand out too much. I might leave that little bit of blue in there. It looks kind of cool, literally cool. Even these little subtle hints of colour in here might mirror something that's happening in the sky. My big pine trees over here. Again, I'm going to carry on using my fan brush. I'm going to go into some of that nice grey colour. Maybe just darken it down a little bit more. A little touch of white. Give your brush a nice little wiggle. Now, what about that for a colour? I won't know how good that is until I put it on the painting. And let's drop in the position of a little tree. Yeah, that stands out against the background, doesn't it? A little friend. One on the end. Yeah. Okay. And Bob does these really amazing little trees. He uses the corner of the fan brush. And I'm going to be doing little smiling trees today. So I'm using the fan brush on its corner and I'm pressing up. Just give a little press. Up, 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 up. You see I zigzag backwards and forwards across the centre line as I go. And I'm going to keep these pretty raggedy looking. They can get a little bit kind of neat and tidy, like someone's come along with a pair of secateurs and prune them up. But I want these trees to look raggedy. Now you see they don't quite work against that background. These colours are too close. So you have to come back in and make a little call and darken up just a fraction. Now you see how I use that contrast to bring this tree forward. Now somebody mentioned recently about fan brushes and struggling with their fan brushes and couldn't get them to work well, and they were worried about the quality of the fan brushes they're using. And you can see from the state of my brushes, these are well worn and they are well past any kind of guaranteed sell by date. I can assure you they are years old. And I'll be quite honest, I prefer brushes which are a little raggedy, a little well used. I think they give my paintings a little more character. So I don't fret too much about them. And I would say if you've got a brush which isn't working well, then check your technique before you kind of look at the brush. Because if I can paint a tree with something that looks as worn out as that, then maybe it's a technique thing rather than a brush thing. But ultimately, if you have a brush which is just falling to bits and won't hold paint and won't hold its shape, then yeah, you have to try and do something with that. But I've done these three little groups, this is a group of 3 trees here. They started off at different heights and somehow I managed to grow this one to be almost exactly the same size as this one. They're like little Siamese twins. And I'm going to show you something now which happens a lot. I like my paintings to have sort of 3 different sizes. So I've pushed this one up a little higher. So I've got lower, medium and highest. But can you see a little kind of problem there? I deliberately stopped my tree right on the line of that mountain. It's like that was a ceiling. I couldn't break through. I couldn't get my tree to go through the top of that. And this is a visual ceiling which sometimes we tend not to want to try and paint through another line. We feel as though we should stay inside it. And I'm saying if you do that, then you're better off to try and paint right through it. And see what happens. It pushes that piece of mountain back in the scene. So, paint through lines. Don't let another part of a painting hold you back. For my snowbank, I've got a fresh 1-inch brush. Again, into that grubby white, little blue mixed with it. Okay, groom your brush really well, both sides. Give it a little wiggle. And I'm going to just take the bottom edge of my little tree here. Pull that out, make myself a little snowbank. Grab a little shadow as I go. To try and sneak that in there behind my tree. It's okay. And then leave a little shadow. Once again, a little more brightness. Just trim the bottom of that tree off. See, just by lifting that up a fraction, I push the tree back. These are just sort of small, subtle changes you can make to your own paintings as you go. Press on, give that a little flick. And now he's back, and these ones have come forward. Off camera there a second ago, I just cleaned up this watery area a little bit more, and I put a little touch more liquid white on here because it was getting a little bit dry. And I got my 1-inch brush, and I picked up a little bit of that blue-grey mixture I had from the sky. And I literally just went back in here, just touched and dragged down a few little bits of shade. And I started putting in the riverbank. Then I realised I'd forgotten to press record. Human error this time, I'm not going to blame the computer. I forgot to hit the record button. So all I did is I just took a little touch of that grey colour, and I pressed and pulled straight down. I didn't bother brushing across. I might do that in a minute. And for these big group of trees here, I wanted a little darker colour. So I went in with a little bit more paint on my brush, and I pressed and I pulled, and I dragged down the colour a little further, and I made sure I closed this end off with a nice deep shadow here. So that's all I did, is I literally just dragged down some of that blue-grey colour there. It's mainly grey from the sky, a little hint of blue here as well, but not too blue. And I refreshed my palette. I ran out of white, so I put out some more white paint. Now this hasn't been dried, but I'm putting on top of the patch of dried white paint, so it naturally stiffens up straight away. Now, and I want to bring this group of tree forwards a little more, but it kind of got us struggling here on the bank a little bit. So here's a neat little trick. I've got 2 fan brushes on the go, a grey one and I've got a white one. So if you want to just add a little bit of, it's just a suggestion of greyness to that back there. Just add a little shadow line in here and there. Just a little more detail. Just stops that looking just so big and open and blank. Just add just a suggestion that there's maybe a few little dips and bumps and lumps down in here. And a nice shadow there, so that when you do want to bring this forward, you can put some bright colour on your brush. Yeah, using that shadow there. And I deliberately let that go out across the shadows or the reflections on the water. And what that does is it brings this forward. Again, contrast, lights and darks. It's all we've got to play with. We don't have colour to do any work for us, so we have to learn to use the lights and the darks to describe what we're doing here. And it means we have to think a bit more about those contrasts, lights and darks. There we go. I think just a little bit more of a shadow line under there. It's a little stronger, a little darker. And I might just use my little round brush for this. It's got a little shadow colour on it. And you can come back in here and you can just add in just the suggestion. Again, if you don't like using a palette knife, a little round brush could be quite good fun. There you go. Now Bob would always use his 1-inch brush to brush across. And again, if that feels a little unwieldy to you, then you can always just use a small round brush. You can get some really delicate little touches going on your paintings. If you feel that you just kind of lack that little bit of control sometimes, a little round brush can really be helpful. Put a few little doers here on the water. For these trees closest to me, I'm going to be using colour which is really very dark indeed. So I'm going to go into my lovely dark mixture. Might see if I've got a little bit of crimson left over. I might pop a little bit of that extra in that too, just to change up things a little bit. And once again, exactly as I did before, I want to start off by putting in the centre line to my tree. I'll drop it into there. And I'd say this little mountain here, he may not survive. I'd like to keep him. Let's drop another one into there. Possibly we could drop in a third one into there. This is going to be the bank. Once again, load your brush fully with colour. This time it's full dark. both sides. And again, little upward smiles. So hold your brush over to one side, handle slightly up, give it a little upward press. There's a full contrast here, so I'm going to go for the darkest darks I can make because I want this to look really close. And notice how raggedy my brush is, really just about holding its shape. It's making some lovely looking trees. There we go. Now, thing to mention here, make sure you finish anything you want to do with the water first in terms of brushing things around on here. Don't be leaving this to the last and then trying to sneak back in there, folks, because you're going to find yourself in a bit of a troubled situation. Drop this one in too. Now, if you find zigzagging difficult, I often advise people just to practice by doing just pressing and doing a center line, getting used to using a little more pressure. And I want you to hear that. Can you hear that crunch? That's important you hear that, because if you can't hear that, it means your brush is skidding or sliding. And we want to be just pressing. Having got the center line in, I can come back in and I can add a branch or two. But getting that midline in first really helps if you struggle with your fir trees. And they've got a touch at the base here. There we go. And I'll drop in the third one. I might add a little more colour to my paint for that one. And of course, a little bit of colour for my snowbank. Again, this can be a little brighter, it's a little closer to us. I need to pick up a little colour from the edge of my bushes here, just so you can see the edge of the snow against the water. Again, I'm just grabbing a little of that colour. I think I want a little more blue, so I'm going to put a little tiny bit of blue down in here in my shadow, so that when I grab it with my brush, yeah, see, I get a little hint of blue coming through, and that's fun. There, see how that gives that lovely effect? Looks like the snow piling up under these trees. Again, get a little more paint, just come back in and just grab that little edge here. Yeah, that's it. And try not to fix these edges, because in fixing them you kind of lose that lovely look of that snow blowing up under the tree. See how that gives my water that lovely look of it going off into the distance there. A nice white finish at this end here. I think I need to put a little bit of highlighting on these trees. They do look a little bit too sort of shadowy, and I might just put in just a suggestion of a little bit of snow on these too. And of course, I'm still going to turn the lights on. And I'm going to take some very grubby white paint, because I want this to still stay fairly subdued and fairly dark. But I'm going to try and put on just the merest suggestion of highlight on here. Nothing special, just a touch. I want this to look really subdued, and again, still sitting way back in the distance of my painting. So I'm going to just pick out just a little suggestion of highlight here and there. But let's say if that looks nice and dark and restrained, then that's what I'm looking for, a little bit more shadow there. Just to separate those two apart. And to be true to our composition of using the biggest contrasts for the darkest trees, I'm going to be using some fairly bright highlights, some snow. So, and I know I've got a light source over there somewhere, so I'm going to just touch my tree and give it just a little touch of snow brighten things up a tiny bit. And again, all I'm doing to load my brush is I pull it through my paint. Now, this is it, folks. This paint has been stiffened and made to be thick. But it's too thick and it won't stick to my tree. See, I'm really struggling to get that to stick to my tree. I'm going to take what's left of my little bit of liquid white. Okay, take a little touch of liquid white. Okay, and I'm going to make my paint a little softer, a little bit wetter, a bit oilier. Get a little bit of paint right on the edge of the brush. Look at that. Just grab a little colour. And see if I can make this stick. If it's dry, it won't stick. And if it's wet, it sticks easy. Look at that. See how that really pops? Now that's probably a little bit too bright. I have to say it's a little too bright. I'm going to tone that down just a hair. But it's still going to be bright. So I can just go back over that again and just push that down into the painting a little more. Maybe I'll leave that one as the dark tree. See if I can get a little bit of paint to stick to there. There, it's stuck okay. So I'll leave this one in the shadows in the background. Maybe I'll just add a little touch of snow to here as well. So there it is. It's the biggest contrast I can get. I think this one does look a little bit kind of lonely. Give it a touch. But I'll save that little shadow in there. And as I say, the reason why this paint didn't want to stick so easily because it was simply too firm and too dry. I probably could darken these shadows up a little more. I could do that now. Paint, and then they get kind of tired, or they kind of just frustrated with it. I'm just going to put a few little zigzags across there, and get that kind of frustration sets in. Then kind of you kind of can't wait for it to be done. And I get that. I understand that, and I've experienced that too. But as my enjoyment, my skills, whatever it is, has improved over time. I enjoy now just painting for the sheer pleasure of doing it. It's no longer something that starts out being fun and ends up being a chore. It starts out being fun and becomes more fun the more I do it. And that, I think, is kind of a big step, really. I just want to sharpen up my bank there a little bit. I'm going to take a palette knife, a little bit of that soft white paint, because I know it's going to stick easy now. Let's just take a little touch. I can catch that with my fan brush. I just want to sharpen these edges up a little touch more. As I just grab this back edge, tease it back. Now for that final touch, I've got some pure white colour and a freshly washed small round brush. I could also use a baby wipe to do this, not baby wipe, cotton bud, that's what I meant to use. I think just up in here. A little bright spot there. Now, dare I chance the smallest amount of yellow mixed in with my white. Henry Cat can't watch, he's had to go. White with a hint of yellow, and we're talking just the merest touch here. because if this is too yellow, and it even sees a hint of the blue in that sky, this will be a bright green eye. So a slightly grubby fan brush here, just a touch, nothing more than that. And I might even try putting on a little touch of this colour here down in the snow. But again, it's really probably a little bit too wet. I should really do this when the painting is dry, but oh well. If it goes green, it goes green. I can always take it off. And I think I probably also want a touch of this on the water too. But again, I stress this is me just fooling around, kind of at the last second, just trying to get this in to the painting. And I understand that if you did this on yours, you would probably give yourself a little more time to let your painting dry. And I'm risking it. There we go. Let's say, when you do your version of this, take your time. Don't rush what I'm doing here. Don't do what I'm doing. So they say, do as I say, not as I do. There we go. I think that's about as much as I dare do, because if I do anything else to this, it's going to be a pickle. So I think we're going to call it as done as I can get it. So there's my finished painting, including that last risky little move there to put a speck of yellow in the bright spot on my sky. I think I just about got away with that. But I hope you've really enjoyed watching this little tutorial and now got a better understanding of how contrast can really help you get depth and distance into your own work. Think about this next time you do a painting, and maybe try your own monochrome painting. Make it another mountain scene or a seascape or a street scene. Whatever you do, think about contrast as being something of a friend to you if you're trying to get depth and distance into your paintings. Now, if you've enjoyed this little tutorial, don't forget you can give it a little thumbs up. You can subscribe to the channel, which is all for free. Don't forget, ring the little bell icon and tick all so you get to find out when all my new videos are being released. And of course, you can leave a comment down below from me. And I always read everything you do, and I try and give you some responses and some ideas if I can. And if you're feeling particularly pleased with what I'm doing on here, you can even support the channel with a small donation to the Buy Me a Coffee Cup. There's even a little membership if you so wish. But I think you should take time and watch another couple of videos, because there's lots more coming right along. Happy painting, people, and happy contrast painting too.